Hello and welcome everyone to NCUI's High Performing Boards in a Virtual World, Board Selection and Recruitment Board Training. This is the second of 3 evenings that will be with you. This particular training on board governance and operations is designed to support novice board members, veteran board members, and everyone in between as we work to support our UIOs. To begin with, we have a background on NCUI. We'll start there, and so we could go to our next slide, but I just wanted to let you know if you're looking for a high-performing board, you're in the right place. Next slide, please. The National Council of Urban Indian Health is a national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent health and public health services for American Indians and Alaskan Natives living in urban areas. NCUI is the only national representative of the 41 Title V UIOs under the IHS in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. NCUI strives to improve the health of the over 70% of American Indian Alaska Native population that lives in urban areas supported by quality, accessible healthcare centers. Next slide, please. You see a copy of the agenda. We have 2 sessions this evening. The first session with our presenter, Evey Maho, of course, is where we'll begin our second session presented by Raynell Gold. The first session is on board selection and recruitment. The second session is on characteristics of high-performing boards. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit about housekeeping. This session is being recorded. Again, for education and quality improvement purposes, NCUI will be utilizing the recording to continue to share and educate frontline healthcare workers throughout the pandemic. All your mics have been muted, so please turn your camera on to allow for interaction. This is a 1-hour session, and this first session is 1 hour, approximately 45 minutes of presentation, followed by a 15-minute break. During that time, questions can be entered into the chat box. A Q&A session will be offered at the end of both sessions, and we'll ask that you enter your questions into the chat box and save them towards the end. Slides will be offered, session slides and the recording of the session will be available at our landing page on the homepage and also shared via email later this week. So for those of you who are attended our first session, you're aware that you'll receive your slides fairly rapidly and the session recordings. If you have any IT difficulties during today's call, please chat directly to the comms and events in the direct chat box, and they'll be able to assist you. Finally, if you could, please enter your name, your UIO or external organization, and any tribal affiliations in the chat box so that we can get to know each other and count your attendance. Next slide, please. A little bit more housekeeping. To ask a question or comment during the presentation, you simply go to the chat box at the bottom of the screen, select chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then type in your question or comment into the chat box that will appear on your right-hand side of the screen. Next slide, please. We collect our data and share it with our funding agencies, as well as keep track of our technical assistance, the quality of it. So your feedback is really important to us. We want you to remember to go to use the link on the page, and I'll drop that link into the chat box so that you can complete a survey at the end of this session. We'll ask that you complete that survey as soon as possible and give us your feedback. Again, it's really important to us that we learn how you feel about each of our sessions. Now, part of that assessment process involves pre and post knowledge checks. The knowledge checks consist of items that'll pop up on your screen. You have about 60 seconds to answer the 4 items that show on your screen starting now. And the results of your pre-knowledge check are shared right now, available to you on the screen. So following the introduction, we'll begin our presentation. Introducing our tonight's presenter for session 1, Evelina Maho. She's Diné from a small remote community of the People's Water, the western portion of Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. Evelina has delivered Board of Directors trainings for Southern California Consortium and Albuquerque Area Indian Health Services Board of Directors and other C-suite leadership trainings. Her career track entails collaborative work with tribes, hospitals, both in the IHS and 638 contract facilities and the urban Indian health centers, administrative fiscal oversight, project design, implementation are her key focus areas. Early in her career, much of her work focused on public health, prevention and management of chronic disease among American Indian populations. She is a Northern Arizona University alumni, having earned a Bachelor of Science in Food Nutrition Sciences with a minor in chemistry. She has her Master's in Administration with an emphasis in Health Sciences and Healthcare Administration. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Evelina Maho to begin her presentation. Evey?
Good evening, everyone. I just want to do a quick sound check to make sure everybody can hear me clearly. If you could wave, that would be great. Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you. Or the word in Navajo, it means you, and it also encompasses your family, your clanship, your community, and how you may exist in this world and the greater universe. Means beauty, huajon, or balance. So when we say Ya'ate in Navajo, we're blessing you. We extend our blessings to you. It literally means you may exist in balance and harmony and beauty in this world. So Ya'ate, welcome. So this evening, we want to get to the end of the talk by an understanding of the tenets on recruitment selection criteria of our board members. We're going to go through some processes on when we hire prospective board members, what that process would look like. And then networking, the importance behind that, with other fellow urban Indian organizations on your own best practices. Okay, next slide. Some questions to consider moving into this presentation and talk, and also as you reflect back on your own board members. Do you feel you have a stable board membership for you? Also, do you feel that you have a high turnover rate? What does that currently look like? And if there is a high turnover rate, do you think that the rate can improve? Some questions to consider. Next slide. Before we even begin with recruitment, we have to begin to ask some other questions, and they are, what is the reason why the board incumbent might be leaving? Okay, and how long was their tenure on the board? We also want to develop, before recruitment, the actual process of recruitment, a series of questions to address some of these reasons that might be posed and given to the rest of the committee or the members. And so again, these answers will help the board in the future. So thinking about possibly, for example, an exit interview might be able to kind of talk to this particular slide. Next slide, please. Why is there a need to develop a board recruitment process? We want to make sure that we have an ideal candidate, and they should have the right skills and the right kind of experience. It's important also that when we're talking about recruitment, we're really trying to identify an individual, a person that might have shared values and commitment to the work that we do. Have strong leadership capabilities, is open to the board culture. So that's also an important aspect in recruitment process, is before the process begins, what is our board culture? Okay, how do we operate? And are we aligned with the organization's mission and vision? And does this candidate also embrace those? Okay, our candidate is also open to new ideas and can contribute to the success of our urban Indian organization. Next slide. So recruitment and selection of board members should not be rushed, okay? We shouldn't be compromising on qualification. It shouldn't be a unilateral decision as well. And have a, our candidates or, our board members shouldn't have questionable backgrounds as it pertains to, for example, the fiduciary responsibilities for board members. Okay, next slide. So who starts and manages the board process? Is it the entire board? Is it an ad hoc committee? Are there established permanent search, recruitment, and selection subcommittees that exist within the board? Or are there other mechanisms? And some of these might already be also outlined in the bylaws. And so in respect to our UIOs, our board of directors are going to be, your processes are going to be all different and varying. Next slide. Things to consider before we begin recruitment. We have to review what our board profile looks like. Okay. We also maximize and showcase all of our urban Indian organizations' attributes. Diversity on the board is also important, and to the UIO and to the rest of the board members, what does diversity mean, and how should that be reflected and aligned with the board as well? Some other questions to consider: is a stipend involved? Is your board activities incorporated into your overall UIO budget? And that may or may not be something that may exist with some of the board of directors across the country. So it varies. And history of board turnovers. What does that look like? And we kind of touched a little bit about some of the questions to ask around that, and how to derive to answers on how to, be able to address those in the future. Will new board membership revise your mission and goals? And that's something it's an important question to ask. In today's healthcare system, we all know that it's forever changing, and a new, fresh outlook on a certain aspect, possibly with your UIO or a healthcare agency, a new board member might have a refreshing outlook on a particular maybe policy or procedure, or on how to generate funds and collaborate with the UIO CEO and the finance team. So there's a lot of things to consider. You may have a board membership and a UIO that is consistently and profoundly standing behind its existing missions and goals, and we wouldn't want a board of directors to come in and be able to revise that. So there's two ways to look at it. And so these are some important questions to consider and to think about. There's it really depends on where you're at as an organization and what your overarching goals are going to be. Once you review all these different areas, then you should be able to start recruiting and have a selection process in place. Okay, these are all your foundational questions, things to consider, things to think about, and there might be some other elements as well to consider. Okay, next slide. So the first step is defining what our needs are as an organization. Next step, next slide, sorry. do we have a job description? Do we have a description that outlines our UIO's mission and vision? Is there a description of what being a board member duties entail? Does it describe specific roles and responsibilities? What are other fiduciary responsibilities involved with this position that they might be applying or interviewing for? What are other variables that are unique to your UIO? Anything from like the urban community, the dynamics, the services, the demographics and trends. Okay, so a lot of the times in the bylaws itself, it will outline all the different roles, responsibilities, and expectations of a board member. So it's important to make sure to revisit those, and it again is aligned with what your UIO as an organization, as an agency, it's striving to accomplish. And so this is a big part of that. Next slide. The other is outlining what benefits are involved with being a board member, being able to pitch that, so to speak. Being a board member might be positive and something to look forward to, because they know that being a board member will be making a difference. And what does that look like? The satisfaction in working with an energetic like board team, a team that complements each other's, a team that understands what one's weaknesses are and what one's strengths are, and combining those efforts to create an opportunity for growth, expansion, enhancement, quality, safe, equitable, accessible healthcare. Or, you know, what is it that makes it special that we have an opportunity to attend special events on our best, you know, interests for our UIO that we represent at the local, regional, national level. So there's a lot of different things. So those things also could be highlighted as well. Next slide. So when it comes to being a board member, we have to be also ask the question, to whom is that board member accountable? Okay, it's important to define that. What authority does each board member have as well? And what are the general responsibilities board members are expected to take on? And again, typically we may not have a job description per se, but it usually is outlined specific. All of those could be outlined in your bylaws as well as the board of directors. Next slide. As far as the term and tenure, again, it's also important to define, and again, I will emphasize this again, it's going to be in the bylaws. It should be outlined how long a board member is expected to serve. What are the conditions under which a board member can resign before the term is ended? And what are the conditions under which a board member may be removed from the position as well? So these are some important questions to consider as well. And I'll comment a little bit later on about some additional thoughts, but let's go into the next slide. The general duties are things that are expected of the board member. For example, do they attend a monthly meeting? You know, it's important that they attend these because we know some of our UIOs might have to report and make sure they are aligned with expectations with like regulatory agencies, accredited bodies, or maybe report to some tribal nations that might be involved with your UIO or organization. There's a lot of things that our organizations collaborate with, work with, communicate with, report to, and there's also like financial obligations as well. There's requirements around financial statements, making sure that the finance division, for example, might be negotiating an IDC rate. and that there's proper communication up the channel to the board of directors to be informed before then those things are submitted to maybe federal agencies that might provide some grants and opportunities for that organization to continue its work in all the different areas. So it's really important to outline and define all of those things in advance, and so that the board member is well aware why it's important that, you know, for example, a monthly meeting is essential. And some at the same time, when we're talking about attendance to like regular meetings, there might be some emergency meetings, and clearly defining those is really important. When accrediting bodies are visiting our facilities, for example, there's a thorough review of policies, procedures. And so those policies, procedures, for example, need to be approved by board of directors. And there may be a subcommittee that focuses on that. And so as a board member coming on board, those are the things they have to be really aware of, okay? Some other things to consider are our board members expected to manage or mentor the organization staff. Now, again, that may or may not be occurring, but I just wanted to mention that, and it would be clearly outlined in the bylaws. Next slide. Time commitment. Again, we talked a little bit about how important that is. We might provide some estimate hours of reviewing materials before meeting, attending board meetings, attending you know, committee meetings or annual meetings or other tasks. I think it's really important also to be transparent about the enormous amount of information that board members typically review. And it can range anywhere from, you know, reports as like incidents reports. It could be financial reports. It could be the opportunity to discuss maybe enhancements or expansions of programs within an organization. And those things require a lot of time to review and understand the content to be able to derive as a board of directors to a decision, because at the end of the day, those decisions impact the organization. So time commitment, it's really important to kind of to provide that in advance. Okay, next slide. The legal and financial commitments as well. What are the legal implications of taking on this role? Okay, what are the expectations in terms of law, bylaw development? Okay, how much of these board members are going to be contributing to the bylaws? And what are the processes and the infrastructure in place within that board on how to monitor those different aspects of the bylaws? Are there financial expectations? Are the board members expected to raise funds, for example? Are they expected to provide sponsorship? What is the board member's role in the organization's finances? So, for example, is the board responsible for budget management? Most cases, no. That's where your chief financial officers are hired by the CEO to manage that. And maybe it's much more of making sure that the overarching finance, you know, like the sustainability piece, long-range planning, and they're well informed and they know the direction of where this organization is going. So it's going to be much more of a broader type of input with the CEO and the CFO. Is the board responsible for the organization's financial health? You know, these are questions to consider, and wanted to just kind of bring that up to the surface for your knowledge and for your information. And I just want to reiterate, every board of directors is going to operate differently. And a lot of these expectations will be outlined in the bylaws. Next slide. The quality and skills requirement is also is very important. So what general skills are needed? Do we want to pick someone that's got strong interpersonal skills? Do we want someone that has strong problem solving and communication skills? Do we want somebody with a strong background in ancillary support system because we're building a primary care component where we want to build maybe a medical home and be accredited by it? And so someone with that type of background might be maybe a requirement for one particular position on the board, so that they can speak to that clinical aspect in enhancement and expansions of program through that, and they can support the clinical support, the clinical aspect of that organization. What are some of the other skills or expertise you may be looking for? Really opening that up among your board of directors, discussing it with C-suite leadership, CEO and his or her team members. They might also envision and see an opportunity where they might need some guidance in certain areas while they develop, enhance, or expand programs. Next slide. Are there specific skills or attributes you need right now for UIO? Okay, so we can pause after our presentations for questions about that, and if you feel like, well, hey, our organization needs this, what are your thoughts? I'm open to those kinds of questions as well. Some examples: do we need a change agent to help the board navigate? So are we looking for someone with financial skills, again, fundraising, marketing, special events, experience around maybe human resource? So those are some questions to consider. Next slide. What qualities do new recruits need to bring to the boardroom table? Next slide. Some examples are, we would love to see people with understanding of our community, the population we serve, and their needs. Definitely passion for our cause, right? Willingness to commit time for board meetings, committee meetings, planning sessions, and specific like special events. A team player works well in a group setting, and also someone who listens well and is thoughtful in considering issues. One of the things I want to add to that last point is that we also want to make sure that they're able to make decisions based on facts, data, research, and the current science, and also what stems and comes from a lot of our American Indian communities, their value systems, their belief systems, and all of those important aspects that are important to people from the population we serve. So next slide. The CEO has a role in board recruitment process as well. So we're going to dive into that next. Next slide, please. They're helping finding candidates also is important. Next slide. I think yep. So the CEO and the board of directors actually work together. I should say also the organization, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the first thing is letting folks know that you have an opening on the board. There are several ways to get the message out. Next slide. Referrals and a word of mouth is one of the primary ways. And the first place to start is with your standard request for referrals from existing board members and volunteers, and asking your existing team to look for candidates from among their contacts, okay? Friends, family, or someone from the community that could speak for the best interest of the organization and what it's deemed and outlined to do. So we do have community members in our in the urban settings where we've got some strong advocates and that have had active engagement and participation, not only with our UIOs, but the different tribal, community members through the different urban settings. So colleagues and associates, our neighbors, our community members at the tribal level, maybe the church or clubs or sporting teams or other, community engagement, where community engagement occurs. Word of mouth, that is really the way things work in Indian country, right? So that's one of the ways. The other is to publicize within your network, your professional networks. Okay, identify candidates from like that wider, and some places to consider are newsletter articles, posting on your organization's blog or forum, website, also posting a request on your Facebook or even LinkedIn page, posting a compelling video about your organization or a photo of last year's event that maybe the board of directors were involved with, and asking for new recruits, and follow up with anyone that may like your post, reaching out, okay, and really being actively engaged to solicit for potential candidates. Next slide. If you have challenges with some of these referrals and the different platforms we just mentioned, all social media platforms are also another avenue. Hiring an advertising or recruitment company. There are companies out there that headhunt, so to speak, and they solicit for individuals who will recruit individuals where you indicate what type of candidates you're looking for, what kind of experience and education and involvement with your specific population, for example, could be a criteria. And that company takes that and they actually go and look for potential candidates. Putting an ad in your urban or tribal community newspaper or newsletter, posting requests through the state or maybe a province volunteer center is also another option. Next slide. These are some resources we wanted to share with you. I just wanted to share with you that these slides will be emailed to you so that you can actually visit some of these sites. Next slide. Screening and selection is step 3. Next slide. So when we're screening or we're interviewing, this is a critical role that we play in making sure that we recruit somebody that's going to fulfill that moral, legal, ethical responsibilities to all those that we reach. So everyone that we serve with it, from our UIO, that healthcare center, that outreach and referral center, including the patients, clients, participants, employees, and volunteers. So, the benefits of screening are threefold. So we want to make sure to better match people's skills and experiences to the needs and opportunities in organization. That's one of the things that may occur and will occur. Also to improve the quality. The screening is important because we want to improve the quality and the safety. And also I want to include in here access of programs and services in the urban Native communities. Reduce risk and liability for both people and organizations. So some of the things that we went prior to these screening, all of those components are part of the requirements. These are the individuals that we're seeking. These are the experiences that we're looking at, and this is why. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're reducing those risks and liability for people and our organization. Next slide. This slide is just provides you some quick interview tips. So we want to make sure that before we interview, we have a standard set of questions. And these should be around the skills to meet that job description. We also want to ask questions to see what that candidate's value systems might be, what their attitudes might be. How do they speak to the topic of time commitment? What are their, what are some potential conflicts of interest that might come up from a discussion with them through an interview? and discussion of any legal or financial commitments, things like that. So these are some questions that could be added into that. Please make sure that with your organizations, or I know a lot of the board of directors, they have legal teams that work alongside them. I would consult with them to make sure that you have questions that are going to be appropriate for you and the organization. Start with the interview with an overview of the selection process, what that process might look like as the board of director and your team and the CEO in the organization. Provide an overview of your mission, your objectives, your vision. Go over the board role descriptions. So what they're applying and interviewing for. What would that entail if they were to be selected? The other important thing to do is to create a standardized form to document all the responses so it's consistently across all applicants. So that's important to do. Next slide, please. These are some a quick snapshot that you might want to develop a worksheet or grid that identifies some of these different components around diversity and quality of components. Again, I would advise, you know, when you're developing questionnaires and forms and standardized processes, make sure that you consult with your HR department and make sure that if you are a board of director that has access to a legal team, to kind of just browse through all of those different forms and questions that you'll be asking. Okay, next slide. So when we're selecting, when we get to the selection part, there's deliberations. We talk through it and discuss the potential candidate. You know, when we select a candidate, there might be primary and if necessary, maybe a secondary pick. And that we're transparent about that rationale behind that decision, okay, based on your set of criteria. So however that criteria are, what the requirements are for that particular board position, those are how you're going to be able to line up and understand who is qualified, who is able to fill that position and contribute to our board's objectives, okay? Some things to consider. Did you consider diversity in your board makeup? For example, gender, Native American, familiarity of our UIO communities, age, professional expertise, health or non-health related, you know, background. So it really, when we are talking about what those criteria are, it's going to be based on what your board needs are, at the same time what the UIO needs are, and how that board member, once it's filled, is going to contribute to the success of both of those two counterparts. Okay, the committee makes selection, notifies the candidate in writing and or verbally, notifies those who are selected as not selected as well. And for multiple selections, make sure that you stagger those board appointments, okay? Because everybody's so busy, constantly things are going and revolving. So keep those things in mind. Next slide, please. We then move into, once we recruit a new board member, we move into orientation. So next slide. An overview is important that involves our mission, the vision, and the values, an organizational chart, review those and making sure that they understand what the structure looks like. The board committee, are they involved with certain committees? Are they, what their roles and responsibilities are? The UIO's annual report and any other important financial reports, how those are reviewed, when they are approved, and how they act as it relates to these different types of reports, and the expectations around those. Role descriptions, your short and long-term strategic plan as an organization, understanding those, Reviewing most recent board meetings is also another way to orient and introduce the new board member to the current work that the board of directors may already be doing. Sharing most recent newsletters and our brochures. Your schedule of board meetings, locations, annual meetings, all of those things as well. I think in addition to this, our organizations, our UIOs, also have important partnership with organizations outside of the UIO communities. And so there might be some opportunity to also introduce them to key leaders in the communities from those varying organizations as well. Next slide. So again, I just want to recap a few things here. Board recruitment doesn't have to be challenging and urgent task to fill a gap. We want to make sure that we're taking the proper time and steps to select the right individual. While you may have one seat open right now, there will always be a turnover of the board. So it's important to have a process in place rather than a stopgap measure, okay? While you'll want to revisit the specific criteria on a regular basis to ensure they suit your current needs, having a recruitment process in place takes that pressure off. So next slide. I'm going to pause here and check the chat box for any questions or comments.
We've been keeping our eye on the chat box and monitoring it. So we could wait a few seconds for questions. Of course, we also said we could save questions to the end. So if participants come up with questions, maybe during the break time or after they reflect a little bit, they could still have an opportunity to add those into the chat. Thank you, Evelina, for your informative presentation, and I'm glad you're able to stick around to field questions and answers as they may arise.